Thanks for listening to KATH 910 AM, Frisco, Dallas, Fort Worth, and North Texas on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Catholic radio for your soul. Heard also at grnonline.com and on your smartphone. Welcome to A Life Lived Joyfully, brought to you by the Guadalupe Radio Network. Join us as we explore the call to holiness and the life of virtue. Here's your host, Monsignor Charles Pope.
And it is I, following the great Deacon Harold Burke Sivers on many of these stations. It's always humbling to do that. Had the great show there before us. So I'm here with you now, and I'm not normally here on Mondays, but we have a fundraising weekend coming up, our week, I should say. And I want to maybe spend the last segments of this show talking a little bit about and preparing you for that. But in the meantime, do a couple more things that are still in the news. You know, on my versions of this show on Tuesdays and Fridays, I've been doing just trying to avert a little bit to the news and make some thoughts on that. But ideally, thoughts that are not just, news for the news sake, but maybe how would we as Catholics, what are our teachings, what's involved here, and, what can we do, as Catholics with some of these things that we read in the news and understand them in a way that I think is fitting for Christians. So with that in mind, I want to, a couple of these stories in this very first segment, I'm just kind of doing some quick updates on a couple of stories we've been following. The Father Rupnik's art. We over the weekend there was a beautiful pilgrimage to the the sun making its way to Indianapolis for the great Eucharistic Congress in July, and they stopped by the John Paul II Center, and there was some controversy because of the Father Rupnik's art. Now, again, for those of you who say, "Who's this guy, Father?" He's the one who's accused, unfortunately, of over 30 cases of adult sexual abuse with religious sisters. And the charges are pretty widespread and serious, and so he was actually kicked out of the Jesuit order for it. But the Pope kind of took away his excommunication that also fell on him briefly, and he seems to be being protected in the Vatican, and that's the background. Now, with that in mind, he's the creator of a great number of artworks in over 200 churches throughout the world, and you'd probably recognize him pretty quickly. They have these kind of like oversized eyes, dark, oversized eyes, kind of an alien look. It's not my kind of art. It's not terrible, but it's not, it's a little unusual. It's very recognizable, though. And so at the John Paul Center, there was some of that, and they were told, look, don't go in there and take pictures, don't make protests, this is not the time for that. And we talked a little bit about that on, I think, Friday, and I think that was a good call. We don't want to turn the Eucharistic procession into something, we want to keep the focus on Jesus, right? And Jesus had some nuts falling out of his family tree, too. Not literal family tree, but those early disciples weren't always all getting along. Everything wasn't always, wonderful. So with all that said, we now see that this is from an article on Friday. The Vatican is once again drawing criticism from using the artwork of Father Marco Ivan Rupnik on the Solemnity of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, and that was on Friday. They published a little prayer book or liturgy booklet, and it has his art on the cover. And again, I've already mentioned he's been accused of spiritual, psychological, and sexual abuse of numerous religious sisters, and so on. All right. And they give some pictures here in the article. So this is not the John Paul Center or the Knights of Columbus. This is now the Vatican. Father Rupnik was briefly excommunicated. I talked to you about that. It was used, his artwork, for the Solemnity of the Most Holy Trinity as well, the week before, and also on the Solemnity of Corpus Christi. So it's getting quite a lot of usage, despite the known controversy about this. It's a kind of a stick it in your ear moment there. Hey, we're going to do this, and it's really, in a way, it's very shocking to a lot of Catholics. I'd like the way to describe it here in the article from the National Catholic Register. They say, Father Rupnik's art, which features large-eyed depictions of Jesus and the saints, is all throughout the world. And a spokesperson for John Paul Shrine, well, we covered that aspect. But at the end of the day, there is widespread criticism coming again to the Vatican, and they even have now a schedule that this art is going to continue to be used into the future for a number of things that are coming up, other feast days. And so I guess the question for you and for me is, where do we stand on that, first of all? I've told you that I have some reservations of entirely excluding artwork from less than holy artists because we'd lose a lot. Somebody said to me, okay, I think I've mentioned to you, Caravaggio was in and out of jail more than a few times. He was quite the scoundrel in some ways. And other artists, too, were not exactly living exemplary moral lives, shall we say. And we could lose a lot of art, Renaissance period especially. Somebody said to me, Rubnik is no Caravaggio. All right. But the principle still remains, Is this what we should be doing? Canceling this art, so to speak, because of the artist. And I'm not entirely comfortable with the idea of saying, yes, we should get rid of all of it. On the other hand, part of the reason we shouldn't just get rid of it, I think, is that would be very, very costly. I mean, most of his artwork is not just like framed things you hang on a wall. It's mosaics, and they're literally built into the structure of many of these chapels and places. And it would probably cost millions of dollars, or they could maybe spackle it over, but then they'd have to come up with more artwork. And so we're talking, tens of millions of dollars in some places to resolve this. So in terms of a prudential judgment, taking into mind the cost is one thing. And likewise, again, what principle do we want to establish here? And how would that not apply maybe to Caravaggio's paintings, for example, just as an example? Well, of course, these are fresh wounds, and the artist is still alive. So I think I would certainly say going forward not to put any new artwork in place. And where possible, I think it might be advantageous to replace it. But I think we just need to be careful with each other in this. It's so easy for us to sit somewhere and say, they should take that stuff out of there, and not realize the cost and the complexities that some of these shrines and other places, this would involve scaffolding up for a long period of time. The chapel becomes unavailable for long periods while things are done to cover, and then what do you put in place? And again, millions and millions of dollars later, and lots of inconveniences. It's easy to sit here and say, take that thing out of there, but to not know what's entirely involved is sometimes a danger for us. However, that said, I really do scratch my head over the Vatican, using this artwork, continuing. That doesn't take any money at all not to print something. In fact, you might save some money, But the point is that what is going on there? Who are making these calls? And is this kind of a, sort of a passive-aggressive, well, it's not even passive, it's just downright aggressive answer to people who are concerned about this art and the artist who made it, and what all that says about our commitment in the church to addressing seriously clerical sexual abuse. So that's the first. I think it's a much more prescient issue when it comes to printed material. And they have known now for several years that this is very irksome to people, especially to the folks who were abused, the women who were abused. But on top of that, there is this, what are we saying to the world when we're harboring a priest? He's in good standing in Rome. He's able, to, as far as I know, to minister and do things. Please correct me if you know that I'm wrong. But he's, I can tell you this much. If any priest here in this country was credibly accused of even a few of the things that he's been accused of doing, we'd be out immediately while investigations took place. The Vatican keeps saying, well, it's being investigated, but there's no evidence that it is. But even if it is, none of us would have that luxury. We'd be out until the investigation was finished. I don't know that I like that either. I thought, we're innocent until proven guilty, but you see, this is where we are in the church today. And it's just not for whatever reason, he's being protected by the Vatican. And it's very puzzling. And even those who are great supporters of the Pope and the general situation in Rome right now are also scratching their head. This one's a hard one. So I'll say one other thing about all of this that I think is important for us to learn as Catholics. There was a Me Too movement that you might recall a few years ago, and it got over the top. You know, they were going after guys for things 30 years ago, and it sounded pretty minor and so on. But there was a truth in the Me Too movement that's often been known in what we might call ethical circles. That is to say, it's clearly the sexual abuse of minors is criminal. It is a criminal offense, and it must be punished. There was a kind of an attitude that, well, if it's between consenting adults, well, it's not a criminal issue. Maybe it belongs in the confessional or wherever, but it's just a whole different category. And this has often been the attitude. However, there's been developing in professional circles for many decades now a kind of a code of conduct or code of ethics that says that no doctor should be in romantic relationships with their patients, or psychotherapists with their clients, or a priest, say, with an adult, let's say a priest and an adult woman that's obviously a violation of celibacy, and it's a terrible sin. But just even at the secular, not criminal law, but just code of ethics, it's not an equal relationship. When a therapist is having, shall we say, romantic involvement with a client, it's not an equal relationship. Likewise, doctor to patient. There's some sense there that the one is a very strong superior and can exude a lot of pressure on a person, and they can also be mesmerized. Oh, this is my doctor. This is the one who's helped me. So it's not always an equal relationship emotionally or spiritually, and that these should be forbidden. And if for some reason something develops, a doctor or other psychotherapist should immediately end that relationship professionally, or and the romantic part of it. One has to go because it's not an equal relationship. Now, obviously, for priests, it's a sin to be involved with anyone sexually. Period. No exceptions. But in addition, let me put it to you this way. If anyone, I've often said to my brother priests, and it's been said to me as well, if anyone who calls you father, if you're having sex with anyone who's calling you father, that is spiritual incest. I don't care if they're consenting adult, your same age. I don't care about any of the age stuff. First of all, it's immoral, number one. Number two, it is not an equal relationship. People look up to priests. They esteem them. It's almost never just two adults on the same standing. So this is the same when bosses are with subordinates. None of this is healthy or good, and there's been a long development now of this idea of romance in the workplace, and certain relationships and things are simply inappropriate because there's different ranks. It's not an equal relationship, and one is in a position of great power to maybe exalt or exploit the other person, and it's unethical. We say in the world, but I would say obviously in the church, it's immoral for obvious reasons for a priest. But even in other cases, we have to consider this. Well, again, that came up a little bit during the whole McCarrick mess. Well, these were seminarians; they were technically adults. It wasn't criminal, and so on. Okay, but your whole future is depending on whether this cardinal likes you, or if he doesn't like you, your history, you're toast, or at least so the thinking goes. It's not a relationship between two equals. It is a very seriously uneven relationship. And your whole future literally depends on this guy and what he thinks of you and whether he'll advance you or prevent you from being ordained. That is unethical. Obviously, it's immoral for obvious reasons, but in addition, it's not an equal relationship between just two adults. All right? So there's lots of reasons to be concerned with what Marco Rupnik did. He was a spiritual advisor, spiritual leader of that community. These women looked to him, as well as other, I guess, men too in the community, for spiritual leadership. They probably esteemed him. They were more than willing to go through with a lot of things he said, just because he said it, and it got weirder as it went. But at the end of the day, what we have to accept, I think, in the church is that we can't just look at whether there's, quote, two consenting adults, because consent isn't always something which both parties have equally. And these are important insights that do come to us from the world, but we've also had an instinct about that in the church as well. We're not to abuse our positions of authority in any way. So all those are some of these moral issues, some Catholic ways of thinking through this, and why this is so alarming. And I could go through all the other things with the Rupnik case that are even more alarming, but for now, we'll leave it at that. And when we come back, we'll look at a couple of other quick stories in the news as well. Thanks.
Hi, this is Dr. David Anders from EWTN's Call to Communion. I believe that the ministry of Catholic radio is one of the greatest tools we have in the church for evangelism today. I hear from people all over the world on a daily basis who have encountered Christ in the Catholic Church for the first time by listening to Catholic radio. Please support the ministry of Catholic radio today. Support Guadalupe Radio Network.
Thank you for listening to the Guadalupe Radio Network and being part of the family. As family, we have a duty to pray for each other, and we would be honored if you would let us pray with you and for you. You don't even have to tell us your name. Just go to our website, grnonline.com, or call our prayer request line and leave us a message at 800-395-4008. That's 800-395-4008. We will be praying for you every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're currently cruising at 39,000 feet. We'll turn that seatbelt sign off for you and let you move about the cabin. Looks like we're about 2 hours and 10 minutes from landing. Plenty of time for you to share your Catholic faith with one another.
Wouldn't it be great if everyone eagerly shared their faith? Why not start today? A friendly suggestion from Guadalupe Radio Network.
Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
And we are back, and here's some items in the news for you. And among the stories we've also been covering is several attempts to limit this chemical abortion pill. It's kind of I think it used to be called like Plan B, and it's basically an at-home abortion. It without getting into all the details, it creates a hostile environment in the womb, causes a heavy bleed, and out goes any embryo or fetus. And it's pretty, from some of the women who've taken it, they say it's a pretty wrenching experience, frankly. But the idea now is to allow people to get this almost over the counter. Without a whole lot of medical supervision, to receive it at home. And as I've said to you in the show before, all this chatter we've heard all these decades about safe, legal, and rare is it shows the lie about that safe part. This is not a safe way for anyone to commit abortion. They all want to talk about the coat hanger thing, and I don't think there's any evidence that there was a lot of that going on before. But all that said, this is called a chemical coat hanger. This is not. There are women can be gravely harmed by this, and they can engage in very heavy bleeds. There's lots of medical dangers to this. It is not safe to be done in some unsupervised medical way. Now, I don't think it should be used at all, but that's the point is it's not safe. All right, and that's the first point we've made about it. Such that in Louisiana, for example, the drug has been placed on as a kind of a Class B drug, wherein it becomes something that must be issued with strong guidance from a doctor. It can't just be handed out quickly over the counter, so to speak. And it is I think that's a good move. Well, of course, all the hand-wringing on the pro-choice side. But why? But why? Well, you know why. For them, abortion has just become almost a symbol of everything else that they want. It's a kind of I hate to use the expression, but has almost a religious quality to them. And this is where they are in this. Any limits whatsoever, even up to the very day of birth, are irksome and hideous to them, at least to the main leaders of this movement, you see. So that's the first thing we want to say. I'm glad we talked a little bit about that. There was also some concerns now that are being expressed that the effect in the environment of the flushing of not just this but other contraceptive medicines into the sewer system, so to speak. It eventually finds its ways into the rivers, and there's been a lot of evidence that contraceptive medicines have caused a lot of, shall we say, strange defects in aquatic wildlife. Again, I'm not going to get into all the science back and forth on that. That's the charge, and it would seem also that there is there was a requested for ruling from the FDA on this question of the environmental concerns, and they were not forthcoming. So there's now been a suit against the FDA by the Federalist. I'm sorry, this was written in the Federalist, but it's from the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, and also the Alliance Defending Freedom is involved in a supportive way. And there is the Supreme Court is being asked to rule on this, and they appear that they probably will do that sometime in this session. And there's an article here from the Federalist I want to read to you, just some excerpts. The author, who is his last name is Baptist, has said here, Baptist recalled that more than 30 years ago, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia wrote in the opinion of a certain case, Lujan versus Defenders of Wildlife, that, quote, it is clear that the person who observes or works with a particular animal threatened by a federal decision is facing perceptible harm and can sue the government. I think a lot of us have been, over the years, been a little bit amazed at some darter snail or some, tiny, little thing. Everything we do is going to apparently ruin some minor thing in the environment. So it's been a little bit frustrating. So in a way, the lawsuit is using some long-term tested ways of the political left to end or to forbid certain things to be done, certain chemicals to be used, fertilizers or pesticides. And these things it's been a long-standing tradition among them to use these. Well, all the hand-wringing starts now when suddenly on the right you've got a group saying, hey, the FDA didn't do what they should have done here, and we're alleging some possible environmental threats, that the flushing of these heavy chemicals and hormonal things into the system, including sadly the aborted remains, all of this is going to affect further the aquatic wildlife. And again, all of this is being poo-pooed by the left, which is even though it's their common tactic. But listen, it says here, this precedent of suing the government has been successfully utilized multiple times by environmental groups in their legal challenges against many federal agencies. For example, environmentalists successfully thwarted the construction of the Keystone Pipeline by citing their professional, scientific, and aesthetic interest in the American burying beetle, which resided in the pipeline proposed pathway. So you see, you can find this beetle that none of us have ever heard of, and it might be impacted, and suddenly the whole thing comes crashing to a halt. Now, apparently it's okay to do that, but it's not okay to ask the government to have similar oversight and concern when it comes to how this so-called abortion pill, mifepristone, how it's going to affect, the environment. So, for example, another group was similarly able to sue the government because One of its members was affected, quote, emotionally by the alleged increased endangerment of whales, causing her heartache. So again, we come now back to the pill. So the plaintiff's doctors argue that the FDA's removal of restrictions on mifepristone has put women who take the chemical abortion pill at higher risk of ending up in an emergency room. This in turn causes pro-life plaintiff OBGYN hospitalists to divert from their desired professional goal of helping women bring new life into the world and to participate in surgical interventions and to treat abortion drug complications that come in. The doctors say it grieves them to see women harmed by FDA's actions. And having to remove the remains of a baby from a mother also causes these doctors heartache. So you see, they're using the tactics that were more common on the environmentalist or other tactics of the left. All of these things are being included in a brief to the Supreme Court. I'm not enough of an observer of the court to know what they're going to do, but it's interesting that it's on the docket and that it's going to be decided. And we'll have to see to what degree they think the case has merit. But the court has Neil Gorsuch recognized the impact of precedent set by environmental cases, and that these could have some impact on their decision here. As you know, obviously, stare decisis, or what do you call the law of precedents, has a lot of influence on how the Supreme Court and other courts rule in matters. There's always an argument about case law, and the fact that so many things, little darter snails and all kinds of other things, have caused the complete halting of entire chemicals or the use of them and so on, dozens and dozens of cases. It makes it maybe more likely than you might think that the Supreme Court would rule on behalf of those who want to keep mifepristone something rarely prescribed, I should say. It says here, additionally, the court upheld in previous cases that the potential future harm or the probability of injury caused by current actions of a federal agency justifies granting relief sought by the plaintiff. So again, these are precedents that are there. Question is, will the Supreme Court apply them? And we often know that justice isn't simply mathematical, and we'll have to see. But at the end of the day, I wanted to keep you up to date on that. There are a lot of moves right now by pro-life groups against this terrible drug that basically puts abortion, at least earlier term abortions, in the, quote, privacy of the home. I'm going to tell you one more time. I'm not a doctor, but I've talked to enough doctors to tell you that the woman, the mother, is one of the most important instincts that are built into the bodies of human beings and all living creatures, is that instinct to survive. And once there's a pregnancy, that it's going to be hard to dislodge that without doing a lot of violence. Abortion is a violent act, and many women who've had them have come forth and said it really is. It's a wrenching, violent act. It's not easy. It's not just like, oh, you won't even notice. You'll hardly feel a pinch. It's terrible. And then on top of that, these chemical abortions flood the body with all kinds of hormonal things and shifts in the whole hormones of the body, and likewise create bleeding, and it creates a very, very wrenching process. This should not be something that women are having done in their home by popping a pill and then just staying home for a couple of days while they, quote, bleed out, so to speak. Again, these are very, very dangerous chemicals. Once again, I have mixed feelings about so many environmental cases that are kind of a stretch, if you ask me, but there's a long series of precedents that Mr. Gorsuch, the Supreme Court Justice, mentioned. And there's also a long series of precedents regarding suing on behalf of potential, not even just current, but potential victims of these kinds of medicines, both in the medical world and the women themselves who will be harmed. And all of these things are being directed at the FDA because the FDA waived all the usual, treatments, or shall we say, all the usual tests and treatments and other things that need to be done to make sure this is safe. A lot of things were simply waived, and they ran this pill through. And this has become an increasing problem, of course, in this country, not only with this terrible medicine that shouldn't even be out there, but also things like, some of the the antiviral medicines, other medicines. Of course, we know how we rushed the vaccination, the so-called vaccination for COVID, and there's been some real harm potentially there too. So all these are ways of saying we're hoping for some oversight, but eventually for good pro-life rulings in these matters.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. Raimundo Rojas of National Right to Life is warning of a dangerous partnership between the World Health Organization and the Center for Reproductive Rights. WHO Director Tedros Ghebreyesus personally lobbied for his new alliance with the legal think tank that seeks elimination of pro-life laws around the world. Rojas will help lead the National Right to Life Convention at the end of this month. The abortion industry and a Texas radio talk show host contend that pro-life laws create medically urgent problems, but pro-life critics say the stories selling that contention on legacy media do not add up. In short, pro-life laws allow for treatment of things like miscarriage, and doctors or medical directors have only to read simple one-paragraph provisions in laws to confidently allow sound professional care for women in even the most complicated situations. This is Life News Radio. News at Life News Radio should make you think, and often it should make you think about calling your elected officials in Washington, D.C. So remember this phone number, 202-224-3121. Let your senators, your representatives, hear from you. 202-224-3121. Economic elites from Warren Buffett to Melinda Gates are pledging millions annually to advocate for abortion, and that only adds to the support from the abortion industry, whose commerce is abortion. Non-profit pro-life groups remind their supporters that broad-spread pro-life giving is more important than ever. And the powerful U.S. House Ways and Means Committee is working on legislation to stop abortions at veterans' hospitals. Direct appropriations cuts would end White House impunity, violating pro-life funding restrictions. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
Number 877-757-9424. What do you think about some of these things? I'm asking, I'm not just trying to review the news, but I'm asking you to think morally about these things, as I must. It's this is a very dangerous pill that's just being pushed through without a lot of oversight or a lot of testing. I shouldn't say testing, but so much all the other things that are required of other medicines. A lot of the FDA waived a lot of this stuff. Does that really serve women? What about all this talk about safe, legal, and rare? There's a kind of a double standard here, isn't there? Right? If it's about something that they want with this abortion thing, then they're going to get it and they'll waive it. Same way, environmental impact and all these other things that other drugs and all are expected to go through, because these drugs go through our system, but they're not completely broken down. They go into the sewer system, and then, yes, some of our filters and things catch them, but not all of them. These are just routine things that the FDA and other federal agencies are expected to do, and for certain reasons they just waive these things, and the pro-life community is not just going to sit around and say, well, they'll use every mechanism at our disposal, see? So again, I think that this is kind of where we are today. There's a kind of a double standard. If they didn't, glory be to God, if they didn't have any double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all, the old saying goes, right? So, but that's enough on that. I want to turn to a financial issue in the church today, and then I want to spend the last section talking about our financial issues in the good sense of being generous and so on. But it's about financial stewardship. This is a very important thing. The people of God put a lot of money in the hands of the church that we are expected to be accountable for. And the best dioceses have very good and very rigorous systems in place in some way to protect that this money is not used for any nefarious purpose or theft or embezzlement or any of these things. But every now and again, and the church is very big throughout the country, lots of different situations, lots of rectories, parishes, places where money goes back and forth. Without good, rigorous standards, some things can slip through. So this is a story from Florida. A Florida woman pled guilty this week to embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the parish where she worked. Heather Derry, a former finance manager of Christ the King Parish in Tampa, reached a deal with the prosecutors after she was arrested last month on charges of stealing over $700,000 from a parish operating account. I would imagine that's probably over a good number of years, but I tell you, she's not to be confused, however, with a different Florida woman in another diocese who's now currently on trial on charges that she stole more than $700,000 from the parish where she worked. That was down in Vero Beach. So there's two stories right there. There are many other stories. In fact, I had a sad case in my own life where the principal of the school where I had been pastor was found to have been embezzling about $200,000. So it's pretty rough, pretty sad. Now, that was one of those accounts that wasn't as easily accounted for. It wasn't one of the main accounts. It was like an alumni account or something that was kept not off the books literally, but it wasn't subjected to the usual accounting practices of this diocese, which I can assure you are very rigorous, and they should be rigorous, all right? But, again, what are the odds? Two women in the same state, and maybe there is something. Maybe the Florida Catholic bishops need to get together and see how rigorous are we being. You can't 100% protect things, but let me tell you about a few of the things that we do in a parish like this, my own parish, and this would be pretty common throughout the country, but not every diocese is as rigorous as they could be. But first of all, when the money comes in, right, the collection, there is never a time when one person is alone with that money. Two, preferably three ushers take the money and they put it into a tamper-evident bag. They all write on the cover of it, and they put the money in there, right there in the room in the sacristy, and the three of them are there together. The money's put in the bag. It is sealed, so that if any time that money is opened or that bag is opened, it will be evident. It will be hard to open it, but you'll see the damage on the bag, and then the money goes immediately into a drop safe. From there, the counters, which again are different teams of several counters, there's never just one person counting the money. It's got to be two, preferably three. And there should be two or three different teams that rotate. And they take the collection that comes in, and they unseal those bags, and then they go to work counting, and then they put them in a bag and take them immediately to the bank. So what we try to do is have no one is ever alone with the monies, the cash especially that comes in, and the collection, and other money that comes in during the week, say through the mail or whatever, is required to be recorded, just noted that it came in and dropped immediately into the drop safe until the counters can get there on the weekend. So all of these are just very important things. In addition to that, we have all sorts of auditors and accountant things. For example, I don't have a discretionary fund, so to speak, or whatever. All requests for money are signed by me and the parish business manager. So there's always two sets of eyes on requests for any expenditures. There's no cash kept here. We used to keep petty cash, but these days there's no point in that anymore. But even though just a $300 amount, it was a small amount for occasional little things. But all of these things are recorded. We have a big parish financial accounting system that uploads to the diocese. Likewise, we have a third party that comes in, an accountant who oversees the spending of the money that myself and the business manager together do. And nothing goes out of this rectory without at least 2 or 3 sets of eyes on it in terms of payments, all right? And then on top of that, every 3 years we are audited by an independent auditing agency that comes in. We're expected to pay for it. And we pay for the audit, and they do clearly make note of any irregularities, or we don't seem to see any receipts for this item. Can you find that receipt, or what have you? And usually it's fairly minor stuff. I mean, we got a good system in this parish. But if large-scale receipts are missing and so on, these things are handed over to the diocese to further investigate. And but there's a lot of layers of oversight, you see. So how does a person steal $700,000? I mean, I'm going to suggest that there's some, again, somewhere in those processes, something's not being followed. I think that it's pretty hard to make away with a lot of money like that without it being noticed. Now, on the other hand, if this is done over a 10-year, 12-year, 20-year period, well, that might be harder to notice, but at the end of the day, good accounting practices, everything from right when the money comes in the door, tamper evident bags, all this stuff, money's never alone. It goes immediately to the bank from the hands of the counters, different teams, different eyes, never somebody alone with the money, including the pastor. These things can prevent an awful lot of this. So again, somewhere the ball gets dropped, usually at the parish level, where there should be this or should be that, but there isn't that. And ideally, auditors catch that when they come through, all right? Now, why do I say all this to you? I first want you to know that I think almost every diocese in this country is very serious about the money that you give. Every parish, there are serious norms in place. I think the most vulnerable of all forms of money that comes in is cash. But again, there too, we seek to make sure that cash is put into tamper-evident bags, and only when, it's never a loan with somebody. It's put into a drop safe, and so on. I never open the drop safe alone. That's not permitted. Someone has to be with me from either the staff or the counting team. And so all of these are ways of saying that we're very serious about this. However, things slip through. Human beings, what is Jesus? I mean, this is not real Jesus. This is pseudo-Jesus. He says, amen, I say to you, wherever 2 or 3 of you are gathered together in my name, there will be a fight. Well, whenever human beings gather, there's going to be sin and foibles, and some people have weaknesses. I mean, the case I knew personally that came up with that alumni fund that someone pilfered, the school principal, she was a decent woman, but she had a weakness. She wanted some of the nicer things. She had some house payments she couldn't cover. It was just going to be a loan. She'd pay it right back. But you know how that works, So again, because people sometimes have weaknesses, it's something to be very careful about. Many years ago, I'm talking about, must have been 45 years ago now. 40 years ago, I was working in the Army Corps of Engineers, and I had this habit. I was very, very thin in those days, unlike now. And I used to take my wallet out of my back pocket and throw it on the desk. And anyway, the manager came, Jack Crabb was his name at the Corps of Engineers, and he said, the office manager, the supervisor in the office, he said, get that thing off your desk, put that in your pocket, lock it up. I said, well, I'm not worried anyone will take it. He says, well, I am. He said, don't you ever tempt somebody by doing that. You see, it's not just about whether you were going to worry about it, it's that other people, in other words, he gave me an important lesson that day. Don't tempt people. Just because you're laid back about something doesn't always mean other people are. And they might be tempted to take that money or to, slip away with a credit card or something. So these protocols that we have are important not just to avoid theft, but I think also to take away suspicion. They're also important to assist people who might have trouble with money situations, to think twice about going about solving that in an immoral way. So we try to take care of each other in all these things. It's the same with things like modesty. Modesty isn't just for the person's sake, but it's for those who might be tempted. And so all of these are important things. Chesterton, I think it was, said that, good fences make for good neighbors. There's a place for fences. There's a place for boundaries and limits and oversight and accountability. And I'm awful sorry that all this money was lost and that sadly 2 women are probably going to jail. And there's an awful lot of pain behind all that. There's an awful lot of overlooking important things that should have been followed. And they need to get to the bottom of it and try to make sure it doesn't happen again. Not just to punish people, but to help people too, to avoid these things who might be tempted to them. So enough said on that. When we come back, speaking of money, I do want to talk to you a little bit about these stations, and our obligation to help support the work of evangelization through them.
Hi, this is Dave Palmer. Do you love all that you're learning about the Catholic Church here on the GRN, and are you ready to dive into the deep? If so, join us each Friday afternoon beginning at 1 p.m. Central for Back to the Father on the GRN's Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter pages as we discuss key teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologia and their application to our everyday journey through this life and our goal of returning back to the Father. Each Friday at 1 p.m. Central, email backtothefather@grnonline.com for more information.
Ever feel like life's just too much? Maybe it's time for a change. God offers us relief and hope. So if you're feeling like you need more peace today, begin at CatholicsComeHome.com.
I used to wonder if God really cared about me. Then I started praying and going to church. I realized that God in my life was the difference between occasionally being happy and finding lasting joy. If you're looking for something more, check out CatholicsComeHome.com.
Catholic radio played a huge part in my life in helping me understand the faith. It was like one of the biggest things, and I still listen all the time. I have the bumper sticker on my viola case. People see it and, oh, Catholic radio. It's the best thing ever. It changed my life. Catholic radio is amazing. Please support Catholic radio. It's just an amazing resource. So much you can learn there, so much inspiration to actually live out your faith. It's just incredible. I love Catholic radio.
The Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul. Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
So I can tell you that we're going to be engaging in a fundraising in the next few days, and I want to say that this combines two, I think, obligations that we have as Catholics. First of all, to evangelize, and then secondly, to be generous stewards of the gifts that God gives, and to contribute to those things that, the works of the church. So these duties come together at a moment like this. Now, first of all, the duty to evangelize. Not everybody's capable of getting either on a radio or in a pulpit or in some public setting, or other settings like that, or getting on joining a missionary order and going to the far off lands, or whatever ways that you want to imagine evangelization is done. But even if you're not always able to be out on the point of the spear, you can at least, the spear needs a long blade and a shaft and to hold it, and there's a lot of things that have to stand behind. So even if you can't go out and do lots of active evangelization, you can help and support those who do. And so part of our work at Guadalupe Radio Network and in all the aspects of Catholic media is to try to have our voice out there. And that takes time, of course. It takes money. It takes talent. People who are on these radio stations. I mean, I'm a priest. I'm taken care of. But some of the lay people who work, they have families they've got to support, and many of them are living sacrificial lives to maybe not earn as much money as they could in a worldly position to take care to make sure the gospel is effectively proclaimed. Radio is a very important way because we can often catch people at times when they're, pardon the expression, a kind of a captive audience. They're driving in their car somewhere, or they're looking for something to hear or listen to. And yes, I know a lot of podcasting and so on is part of it too now. But at the end of the day, it's a very important medium to get the gospel out there. Now, Jesus said, of course, we all have this obligation, go ye therefore unto all the nations, and teach them everything that I've commanded you, and baptize them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, one of the ways we go ye therefore is through the airwaves. And again, you and I can't always own a radio station, or, but we can help those who do. We can help those who do get on the airwaves or run television, EWTN television, so on. All of these things are very, very important ways that we can support this work. And it is not just something nice little, when you get around to, if you have a little time, kind of spread the gospel. Jesus kind of sets it up as like job one. Go make disciples. And Jesus said elsewhere, like for example, this is in Luke's gospel in the 12th chapter, he says, I've come to cast a fire on this earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. I have a baptism to undergo, and how distressed I am until it's accomplished. So again, this idea of casting a fire on the earth, it's not a fire in the usual sense, but think of all the radio waves that go out from broadcast tower, a kind of a fire on the earth, bringing forth. And Jesus goes on in that passage to say, do you think I've come to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, not peace, but division. Now, in other words, he's saying, look, there's more to the gospel than just being nice and not getting into fights with people. It means proclaiming the truth, and that will sometimes create divisions. People are either for it or against it. So we're out there to engage in the battle, because there's a lot of stinking thinking out there. And without the Catholic voice, we're in real trouble. And so in special and certain ways and times, we ask you to become part of this mission directly by supporting us and in this work. And so what I want to say to all of you is that if you're going to be a true disciple of the Lord, you have to be an evangelizer. And while not all of us can evangelize personally and effectively, we can always support those who do. And one of the main ways that's done today is through Catholic radio, and specifically now, Guadalupe Radio Network, a good group of stations throughout the country who are helping to get this word out, so that at drive time and other times when people turn their radios, they hear all of a sudden, what's that? How many stories have we collected over the centuries there, Mr. Producer, about how many people have heard something that was said, sometimes just in passing, and all of a sudden, later on they become a Catholic and they're receiving the sacraments and helping to spread the faith themselves. Almost every fundraiser dinner that I've ever gone to, there's almost always someone who gives a testimony like that. I was minding my own business, tootling down the road, living a bad life. Not happy, but not sure why I wasn't happy. And suddenly I heard just something, and it changed my life. So again, these are the kinds of things which, there's just all kinds of stuff standing behind what you're hearing right now. You've got this crazy priest, and I'm sorry about that, I do apologize. But there's a producer, there's all this electronic equipment. I mean, I've got this very expensive official radio announcer's microphone here, and something called a Comrex, and it makes, all of these things are very expensive, and likewise adding to that all the other equipment, the ownership of radio stations, the licensing, all the kinds of stuff that has to go on is just bewildering. So just know there are costs, but we can cover them, but only if you help us. And so that's the first thing I want to say. Now, St. Paul says this regarding our giving. He says that we should, in every way, be as generous as we can. So Paul talks a lot about this, and he says, I want to ask you, he says, to be generous, so that you, through your excess, can help those who have need, so that later you who might have need can be helped by those who have excess. He says, I don't want this to bankrupt you, but on the other hand, be generous where you can. And so these are the things which, St. Paul reminds us, that our generosity is something that is commended, and it is expected of us. So with all that in mind, I just want to say that I know the Guadalupe Radio Network, where I do most of my work, is very careful to be prayerful for you who are generous and donate. We try to honor givers as well. We try to have different fundraising dinners, do things that are fun, and there are just times where we have to do these sort of on-air requests for help. And I really hope that early on, you'll go ahead and decide to make a commitment. And I promise you that money will go a long way. Very frugal, the operations here, but it is costly. It is costly. So we try everything we can do to save money, and we're very careful stewards. All that stuff I said to you in the previous segment about being careful about how money is used and how it's collected and distributed, and all of those things are all part of, we're also subject to all kinds of accountability, audits and all the kinds of things that you might expect in any organization. So your money is received with great gratitude and also used very carefully to make sure that this gospel word can go out. For my part in the show that I'm doing with you, it's kind of developing as we go, but I'm trying, at least in these last few days especially, to talk about things in the news, but not just in a way you would hear it somewhere else, but maybe to say, what are some of the moral principles involved? What can we learn as Catholics? Why is it important to have, like I said in the last segment, fences? That maybe those are good things for us. We live in a world that hates fences, but maybe the fences are important. So that's just an idea there that we talked about. But the point is, be generous. Be very, very generous if you can. And realize that God will never be outdone in generosity. He will more than reward you for anything that you extend to his kingdom. So in the meantime, may Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
All Catholic, all the time. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul.